It's a deadly November in America, and 4 men stand on death row for crimes that shocked entire communities. From a teenage girl brutally attacked behind her own door, to a state trooper ambushed in his driveway, a young man sentenced to death for a stabbing he didn't commit, and a store manager murdered by a former employee. These stories reveal a chilling question. What drives someone to commit acts so horrific that justice demands the ultimate punishment? Welcome to Mindframe. True crime. Please remember to subscribe and tell us where you are watching from, because this is the best way you can be supporting us tell these stories. Stay with us as we dive into each case in detail. Case 1. Tremaine Wood. It was just after midnight on January 1st, 2002, at a motel in North Oklahoma City, when a guest was found mortally wounded from a stab wound, an end to what had begun as a New Year's Eve celebration. The man cuffed to the bed was 22-year-old Tremaine Wood, soon accused of murder in a robbery that spiraled far beyond what anyone expected. But what exactly drew him into this deadly moment? And why is he facing execution even though his brother admitted to the killing? Stick with us as we dive deeper. Tremaine Wood was born and raised in Guthrie, Oklahoma, the youngest of 3 boys in a household marked by violence and instability. Their father, a police officer, allegedly terrorized the family with beatings and threats, which their mother described in vivid detail during clemency filing hearings. Though he appeared outwardly like many young men, there were early signs of trouble: exposure to domestic violence, sexual abuse by a neighbor, which Tremaine later disclosed, and association with his older brother Jake, who introduced him to guns and the street gang life. Can you trace the signs of someone who might eventually commit serious crimes? Let me know what you think in the comments. By New Year's Eve 2001, Tremaine was tangled in a plan with his brother and 2 women. What began as a celebration at a brewery ended at a motel with a robbery in motion. Around midnight, the 2 women attempted to lure 2 men, including 19-year-old migrant farm worker Ronnie Whipf, into a motel room under false pretenses, and then a robbery was executed. During the robbery, Ronnie was stabbed and later died from his injuries, while Tremaine admitted involvement in the robbery. His brother Zyiton admitted to the actual stabbing, yet Tremaine was sentenced to death under Oklahoma's felony murder statute. After Ronnie Whipf collapsed in the motel room, authorities recognized connections to the robbery: masks, knives purchased earlier, witness testimony from the 2 women, and Zyiton's admission. During investigation and trial, Tremaine's defense raised concerns. His court-appointed attorney was reportedly dealing with substance issues and did minimal mitigation work. Prosecutors allegedly withheld evidence about witness deals. At trial in 2004, Tremaine was convicted of first-degree murder under the felony murder rule, despite not personally delivering the fatal wound. His brother Zyiton received life without parole after admitting the killing. Tremaine was sentenced to death, and his appeals remain ongoing. Execution's dates have been set, stayed, and reset. As of November 2025, he remains on Oklahoma's death row, awaiting possible execution. The death of a young migrant farm worker in what seemed to be a party-turned-robbery sent shockwaves through Oklahoma City's motel district and raised questions about safety, race, and privilege. Advocates and legal analysts have pointed to Tremaine's case as an example of racial bias, ineffective counsel, and the harsh reach of the felony murder rule. Tremaine Wood remains incarcerated at the Oklahoma Department of Corrections death row facility in McAlester. His attorneys continue to argue for clemency and a new trial based on withheld evidence and trial counsel problems. On November 5, 2025, a split board recommended clemency. Do you think Tremaine Wood has truly been given a fair trial? Will he ever receive justice or a second chance? Share your thoughts below. Case 2. Brian Frederick Jennings. It was the early hours of May 11, 1979 on Merritt Island, Florida, when 6-year-old Rebecca Kunash was found naked, her skull fractured, floating in a canal. What followed revealed the shocking truth. A former Marine had quietly broken into her home, committed horrific acts, and would spend decades awaiting execution. But how could someone escape notice for so long and finally be held accountable after more than 4 decades? Stay with us as we dive deeper. Brian Frederick Jennings was born December 9, 1958, in Florida. He served in the U.S. Marine Corps prior to the crime. Although many details of his early childhood are not widely publicized, by the time of the offense he had been drinking and socializing with friends, and had no prominent record of prior violent crimes documented in the public record before May 1979. Despite the lack of earlier violent convictions, the fact that Jennings broke into a child's bedroom, abducted her from her bed, and committed both sexual assault and murder in one deeply orchestrated event strongly suggests disturbing and pre-existing impulses. On the night of May 10, 1979, Jennings, then on leave from the Marines, had been drinking with friends in bars on Merritt Island. By early morning hours of May 11th, he walked to Rebecca's home, removed the screen of the bedroom window, entered her room while she slept, and abducted her. In the dark of the early morning, Jennings drove the young girl to a nearby canal. He raped her, fractured her skull by repeatedly striking her head, and then drowned her by holding her underwater until she ceased to struggle. What do you think triggered Jennings to commit such a horrifying crime? Share your thoughts in the comments. After Rebecca's body was found floating in the canal on May 11, 1979, investigators linked the abduction from the bedroom via broken screen and entered window, and matched Jennings' fingerprints and confession to the crime. During multiple trials and appeals, Jennings' defense argued issues including ineffective assistance of counsel and prosecutorial misconduct, including withheld evidence. Jennings was first tried in February 1980, convicted of first-degree murder, kidnapping and sexual battery, and sentenced to death. His conviction and sentence were vacated on appeal in April 1982, remanded for a new trial. He was retried and again sentenced to death. Legal documents show multiple retrials, at least 3, before final sentencing. The execution warrant for Jennings was signed by Florida Governor Ron DeSantis on October 10, 2025, and his execution is scheduled on November 13, 2025, via lethal injection at Florida Department of Corrections. The murder of a 6-year-old girl in a seemingly safe neighborhood on Merritt Island shattered the sense of security for families in the region and left an indelible trauma for Rebecca's loved ones. The case has been cited as one of the worst of its kind in Brevard County. It has also become a focal point in the death penalty debate in Florida, especially as Governor DeSantis sets a record pace of executions in 2025. Jennings remains incarcerated at the Florida State Prison awaiting execution. His legal team continues to challenge the warrant and raise issues of legal representation, arguing his right to counsel has been violated as his execution date approaches. Do you think Brian Frederick Jennings has truly been given a fair trial? Will any change in his case alter what justice means in this scenario? Share your thoughts below. Case 3. Stephen Corey Bryant. It was a quiet October evening in rural Sumter County, South Carolina, when 62-year-old Willard T.J. Teachin was found shot multiple times inside his home. Candles burned around his body. His eyes were burned with cigarettes, and on the wall in his own blood someone had scrawled "Victim 4 in 2 weeks. Catch me if you can." What could drive someone to not only kill but taunt investigators with their victim's blood? Stick with us as we dive deeper into what led Stephen Corey Bryant down this path. Stephen Corey Bryant was born on April 12, 1981 in South Carolina. By all outward appearances, he was a young man from a rural community, yet beneath the surface his life was marked by serious turbulence. According to court filings and defense statements, Bryant was sexually abused by multiple male relatives as a child, began experimenting with drugs, including methamphetamine and marijuana laced with insecticide, and struggled to cope with the trauma. Although Bryant had no high-profile criminal record prior to the 2004 murders, the combination of childhood sexual abuse, substance use, and deep psychological damage suggested a pattern of hidden trauma and risk. His defense later argued his mother's alcohol and drug use during pregnancy may have impaired his brain development, contributing to his violent behavior. Can you trace the signs of someone who might eventually commit such crimes? Let me know what you think in the comments. In early October 2004, Bryant embarked on a short but brutal crime spree in rural Sumter County. The victims were strangers or acquaintances. The settings were isolated dirt roads and a secluded home, the emotional state seemingly volatile and escalating. On October 9th, he picked up his co-worker Clifton Gainey, shot him 3 times and left his body on the roadside. 2 days later, on October 11th, he entered Teachin's home under pretense, fatally shot him 9 times, set candles around the body, burned the victim's eyes, and used a potholder dipped in his victim's blood to write the chilling message on the wall. Then on October 13th, he picked up Chris Burgess at a convenience store, drove off and shot him twice, leaving him on a rural road. After the murder of Tietjen, law enforcement found the scene with the taunting message, the burns, and the context of other nearby killings raised alarm. Investigators connected the 3 murders, and a non-fatal shooting of Clinton Brown, to Bryant through witness testimony, victim connection, and his own confession. The investigation. Bryant was arrested on October 13, 2004, and admitted to the crimes. While in jail, he also assaulted a detention officer, further complicating his legal position. In 2008, Bryant pleaded guilty to multiple counts, including 3 murders, and was sentenced to death for the Tietjen killing, along with life sentences for the other homicides. Outcome? On October 17, 2025, the South Carolina Supreme Court issued the death warrant scheduling his execution for November 14, 2025. The murders shook the quiet rural county of Sumter, South Carolina. Residents lived in fear of the random, get-in-the-car nature of the killings. The message in blood magnified the terror and media attention. Bryant's case became a flashpoint in discussions about capital punishment, mental health, and trauma. His defense's claims of fetal alcohol spectrum disorder and childhood abuse raised questions about culpability and fairness in the death penalty context. Bryant remains incarcerated on death row at South Carolina Department of Corrections. He has until October 31st to choose his method of execution: lethal injection, electric chair, or firing squad. He subsequently selected the firing squad. If carried out, he will be executed on November 14, 2025. Case 4. Richard Barry Randolph. It was August 21, 1988, when the manager of a small convenience store in East Palatka, Florida, collapsed after a brutal attack. What began as a robbery by a former employee escalated into a nightmare of rape, strangulation, stabbing, and theft. The man arrested for the crime was Richard Barry Randolph. But what drove Randolph to commit such a horrifying act? And why would his execution be scheduled decades later in November 2025? Stick with us as we dive deeper. Richard Barry Randolph was born around 1962. He is 63 as of 2025. His early life details are sparse in the public domain, but by the late 1980s, he was working at the Handy Way convenience store in East Palatka, in Putnam County, Florida. There are no widely reported accounts of childhood abuse or major publicized criminal antecedents that foreshadow his later crime, though his employment in a convenience store and familiarity with its operations would play a pivotal role in the crime. Randolph's decision to attempt a robbery of the store where he worked already signaled a breach of trust and growing desperation or disregard for rules. He tried to break into the safe, indicating escalation beyond petty wrongdoing. Build up to the crime. In August 1988, Randolph allegedly targeted the Handy Way convenience store where he had once been employed. Possibly motivated by financial gain, familiarity with the site, and opportunity, he decided to break into the store's safe. On August 21, 1988, Minnie Ruth McCollum, the store's manager, interrupted Randolph as he tried to steal money or lottery tickets. What followed was horrific. Randolph beat her repeatedly about the head and body, strangled her with a ligature, stabbed her with a knife, and then fled in her vehicle. She lay in a coma before dying 6 days later from brain injuries sustained in the attack. 3 women saw Randolph leaving the store, discovered the store in disarray, and called law enforcement. Deputies found McCollum critically injured, and the investigation quickly centered on Randolph. Randolph was arrested soon after at a Jacksonville grocery store while attempting to borrow money and cash stolen lottery tickets, tying him to the theft from the store. Investigators say he admitted his attack and directed them to bloody clothing he had discarded. In 1989, Randolph was convicted of murder, armed robbery, sexual battery, rape, and grand theft. The prosecution laid out a case involving the robbery attempt, the beating, the rape, and the ensuing death of McCollum. The defense is less publicly detailed, but his convictions stand, and the sentence was death. A death warrant was signed by Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, scheduling Randolph's execution for November 20, 2025 by lethal injection at the Florida State Prison. The murder-robbery of a trusted store manager in a small Florida community rattled locals. A place of employment turned violent scene shifted perceptions of security, workplace safety, and the vulnerability of retail employees. Randolph's case is part of a broader surge of executions in Florida in 2025, tied to Governor DeSantis's aggressive death warrant policies. Legal advocates have flagged concerns about due process, timely appeals, and whether the accelerated pace of executions allows sufficient review. As of now, November 2025, Richard Barry Randolph remains on death row awaiting execution at Florida State Prison. Despite decades of incarceration, his case continues to be referenced in discussions about the death penalty, especially in Florida's heightened execution activity. Do you think Richard Barry Randolph has had enough time for appeals and rehabilitation, or is his execution justified at this point? Share your thoughts below. Case 5. Roy Lee Ward. It was just after noon on July 11, 2001, when a 15-year-old girl, Stacy Payne, answered a knock at the door of her family home in Dale, Indiana. But the stranger who stood there, claiming to be looking for a lost dog, carried far darker intentions. By the time help arrived, her home was the scene of a brutal assault that would shock a quiet community. Roy Lee Ward was born in, while specific early life details are limited in the public record, his case history shows. He was 44 years old at the time his execution date was set in 2025. He came from a typical small-town setting, but behind that outward normality were cracks. No strong public record of major earlier violent crimes, yet his later behavior revealed a capacity for extreme violence. Though Ward did not have a long publicly documented criminal background before this murder, there were procedural setbacks and retrials later that suggest the severity of his crime demanded extraordinary measures. By July 2001, Ward's life had reached a turning point. On that day in Spencer County, Indiana, he knocked at the Payne home under false pretenses, telling Stacy he was searching for a lost dog. Inside the house, he committed a savage crime. The younger sister heard Stacy's screams. The town marshal found Ward standing in a doorway holding a knife. Stacy was found in a pool of blood with brutal injuries, including a lacerated abdomen and spine injury. She died hours later. The crime was discovered almost immediately. The younger sister made the 911 call. The marshal arrived, found Ward at the scene, the victim critically wounded. During the investigation, Ward was arrested on scene. He underwent appeals and post-conviction procedures for years. His attorneys later challenged Indiana's lethal injection protocol, arguing constitutional concerns about the method rather than the conviction itself. At trial, Ward pleaded guilty after an earlier conviction was overturned, and the prosecution argued for death based on multiple aggravating factors including rape, murder, and severity of the injuries. In the end, the Indiana Supreme Court finalized his execution date in August 2025, after denying his appeals. The community of Dale, Indiana, small, tight-knit, was left reeling. A seemingly safe home turned crime scene shook local residents and changed lives. The victim's family continued to live with the trauma and loss. Media coverage followed his execution date and legal battles, highlighting questions about lethal injection drugs and transparency in Indiana's capital punishment process. As of now, October 2025, Roy Lee Ward is scheduled for execution before sunrise on October 10, 2025, at the Indiana Department of Corrections facility in Michigan City.